Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a tag video, but just before I get into that, I just want to say that as this is my year of reading big books, one 700-page book per month, that it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to try and do a regular Friday reads, because I start each month with the big mammoth, and it takes a good 2-3 weeks to read that, so it makes more sense, I think, for me to do monthly wrap up. So last year I read 130 books. There's going to be a huge drop off this year. I imagine probably to no more than 50-60 books. So I'm going to switch, as I say, from regular Friday reads to monthly wrap ups, which means that there'll be more room potentially for non-review type videos, of which this is one. As I say, it's a tag video. This is the Divine Comedy Reader tag, and I was tagged by Roth at Scallydandling about the books. The original was by Tom of LA Books, who's leading a group read of Dante's Divine Comedy. And I had the good fortune to be guided through Inferno for my first ever time by Alan over at Big Hard Books and Classics. I think we did it in December 2019. And that was very instructive for me, because I struggle with anything pre-20th century, to be honest. So it's really helpful to have Alan to hold my hand through that. So these are all prompts, you know, from the Divine Comedy that Tom has drawn up. So the first one, Virgil and Dante, Inferno Canto I, quote, "Are you the font that pours so overwhelming a river of human speech?" Which is a very great poetic line of font as in fountain. But of course font now means also, you know, typesetting language, which is, you know, something that I'm very interested in. So that kind of has double reverberation for me. Are you the font that pours so overwhelming a river of human speech? But that's by the by. One of your favourite books featuring a master-pupil relationship between two of the main characters. I found this tricky, really. I could say one of the worst books I've ever read had a master-pupil relationship at the heart of it, and that was Empire V, The Prince of Hamlet, by the usually reliable Victor Pelevin, who will appear later in this tag in a more positive sense. And it's two young Russians, one male, one female, who get bitten by vampires and are whisked away to sort of a secret location, which is basically vampire school, teaching them how to be vampires, with sort of all the morality, which may sound strange when applied to vampires, but it's a lot about the relationship of humans to non-humans, Buddhism, capitalism and stuff like that, Pelevin's usual obsessions. And the main instruction is not to portray yourself as being a vampire, but still being able to live like one. And it's a master-pupil relationship because they are sort of basically having lessons, being talked at endlessly about all these issues. And it reads like a lecture. I mean, as I say, there's really interesting ideas, but it's not a novel. It is, you know, Pelevin at the reader through the flimsy guise of two young vampires being instructed by older vampires. It's shocking. A book I was undecided on, but was curiously effective, and that's Jesse Ball's A Cure for Suicide. I didn't really know whether I liked it or not, but it was certainly interesting. So basically, there's a series of mentors and their mentees, and the mentees seem to be coming back from some sort of complete memory lapse, memory breakdown, and you realise that that's, you know, that basically they've been brought back from the brink of suicide, and they're sort of being reprogrammed both away from suicide but also back into life itself, which is something I have direct experience of, because that was, you know, my father attempted suicide and ended up in a halfway house after the hospital, in which he had to be encouraged to see that life was worth carrying on and living and stuff. So I recognise that mechanism well. And these characters who are sort of on the recovery, they reach a certain point and they're sort of gradually integrated back into society. And then something goes wrong, and they're sort of, you know, put in a coma again, and then they're given a different instructor to try and get over the hurdle at what point they fail. And it's about sort of relationships and things of value, but coming to it from a very strange place of having to rediscover them, having to relearn them, and evaluate them, and where they fit into your, you know, value system and desires and stuff. It was a curious book, but effective, as I say. And then the other one, unfortunately I don't have this anymore. I suspect it must have succumbed to my mould, and I can't believe I haven't replaced it, because it's one of my favourite novels. And it came out about 3 years ago. It's called The Spacemen of Bohemia by Jaroslav Kulfar, who's obviously of Czech extraction, but who's actually American. It was his debut novel. And it starts off sort of, we've had the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia in the late 80s, where communism has been overthrown. And there's a father and mother and their son, and the father and mother were basically part of the old communist regime, and he was a secret policeman, i.e. a torturer, interrogator torturer. And he and his wife are being sort of summoned to answer for their crimes. And as they're driving on their way to the hearing, there's a car crash and they die. They may have been bumped off or whatever. It's and this is all right at the beginning of the book, so it's not it's not a spoiler. So the son has to go and live with his grandparents out in the country, and it's about being on the wrong side of history. That through no fault of his own, this child is sort of had all this heavy baggage, put on him by his parents originally through what they did, and then by their death as history changes sides, as it were. And he wants to redeem the family name, so he sort of volunteers to be the Czech Republic's first spaceman in space, where the government have bought a rickety old rocket, sort of second-hand, which I think is quite a funny concept in itself. And his grandfather sort of saying, no, the only way not to be on the wrong side of history is not to put your head above the parapet. But the son prevails. No, we have to restore the family honour and restore the family name. And he goes into space, and of course it's a rickety old rocket, and it's going to, basically blow up there. But while he's there, he has this sort of strange sensation he's not alone. And this is where the mentor teacher comes in, that there's some alien being is sort of guiding him through quite sort of philosophical, metaphysical sort of exchange of ideas, and then sort of helps save his life when the rocket finally does give away under him. And he's saved by a passing Russian rocket and brought back to Earth. But the problem is, because it's all been televised, the rocket sort of exploding, everyone in the Czech Republic thinks he's dead, and he's become a hero in his absence. So he can't suddenly reappear, because that will destroy that illusion. So the rest of the book is him sort of, again, meditating on what he can no longer have, so his wife and things like that. And it's a beautiful book, and there are all these different sections. Each section is just so rich and gets you thinking. So I very much have to rebuy that book, and as soon as I finish recording this, I'm going to go and reorder it. I'm really annoyed that I haven't done it up till now. I hadn't noticed until recently that I didn't actually own it anymore. Okay, so that's prompt 1. Prompt 2, The Psychedelic Eagle from Paradiso Canto VIII. In the sky I saw, distinctly shown in golden fire, the image of an eagle's head and neck. A book that fired up your visual imagination more than others. Well, I don't have a book that does that all the way through. I have some really sort of images of scenes as described by the authors in books that stop me up and have stayed with me, but not the whole way through book. So, for example, in Ulysses, James Joyce, the scene in the funeral, but it's when they're approaching the graveyard, and there's the cemetery, and there's sort of railings outside, and just the sort of, as they're on their horse-drawn carriage, and they're passing it, and what that does visually, the railings, almost a bit like sort of zoetrope kind of effect. And Joyce describes it absolutely brilliantly. Stuart Evers' book from last year, The Blind Light, where two men from different social classes in the post-war era, so in the early 50s, are on national service, and they've been stationed up in Cumbria, which is near the Scottish border. And one of the things they do in their training is they have to train for a nuclear attack in terms of how they would handle literally the fallout. And what the military have done is they have built a whole village, and as if it had been hit by a nuclear bomb. So the descriptions that Evers gives there of the destruction and the ruination are just fantastic, absolutely fantastic. I mean, scary, because it is about death and destruction. And you wonder that if the authorities put in as much effort and thought into something creative and positive for its population as a representation of death and destruction, we all might be better off. Another book is The Great American Novel by Philip Roth, which is a book about baseball. And there's one scene, I mean, it's a brilliant book. I mean, I'm a baseball fan, but it's a brilliant book. It's a satire in which the best pitcher in the league is pitching, and he's sort of won every match that he's pitched. And the umpire are calling his pitches so tightly that the pitches that he believes are strikes are being called balls. And it's this sort of back and forth between the umpire and the pitcher, really needling each other. And if you don't know baseball, the pitcher is on a raised mound here, then you have the batter, and the umpire is directly behind the batter. So in a way, the batter is sort of in between the two, but not holding, not really separating them. And the only thing separating them is the distance between the mound and the batter's box. And the Roth ratchets up the tension as the pitcher gets more and more wound up, and he has this weapon in his hand, which is a ball that he can throw at 100 miles an hour. And the umpire isn't giving any ground. He's saying, his calls are right, and the batter's sort of quaking in between. It's just a brilliantly visual. You can absolutely see it. Then we have Almonsetter's Luck by William Gass, which was his debut novel, which is about it's in Ohio. I think it's late 18th century, early 19th. And there's a scene in it in which a pastor of the village is preparing his sermon. He's doing it in the little graveyard in his sort of church outside. And this pastor's basically an evil guy. The roles are switched, that the parishioner is an angel and the pastor is the devil, kind of thing. And he's full of bile about the parishioners, and this one parishioner in particular who's called Almonsetter. And he's rehearsing this speech, working himself up into a lather, walking amongst the graves. It's just so brilliantly, realised. And finally, a book I actually have. All these other books I mentioned, either I no longer have, or they're in the shed, and the grass is too saturated for me to go out to the shed today and get them. So this is Life, a User's Manual by Georges Padec, quite a thick book, as you can see. And it's basically an apartment block, sort of 19th century apartment block in Paris. And it's a representation of the lives and the interiors of every single apartment in the block at one moment in time. And it's a tour de force of storytelling, It's just so wonderfully imaginative. As you know, I'm not big on story, but these are lots of little stories, some, literally in a paragraph, and they're just, you just wonder at the creativity and marvel at it. So you've got the visual thing of all of these different rooms and who populates them. So that's a very visual thing. But also there's a central image of a guy who has commissioned the making of jigsaws for ports, harbours around the world that he's visited and painted while he's at the harbour. And he sends these paintings back and they get made into jigsaws. So gradually it's, the cutting of the wood and then the laying of the picture, it's that sort of production. And then he decides to reverse it all. So, stripping the picture off each individual jigsaw and then destroying the wood. It sounds strange, but actually it's really, really effective as an image of the lives of people in this book. It's a fantastic piece of work. Prompt 3, Count Ugolino, Inferno Canto XXXIII. And then hunger had more power than even sorrow had over me. A book you read with such graphic and horrific descriptions that you will never forget them. Again, it's not the whole way through a book, it's particular scenes. So this is No Bones by Anna Burns, she of Milkman. Now this book preceded Milkman, and you can see some of the themes of Milkman, laid down here, because she's writing about her home country of Northern Ireland. Not that she lives there anymore, she lives in England, but, she, from what I can gather, was completely traumatised by her upbringing in Northern Ireland. And there are some fairly traumatic scenes described in here. So one of them is a female character is walking home after a night out, and there is a shadowy car sort of around her, sort of following her steps, and how she sort of deals with that. And this card belongs to this a real life paramilitary organisation, and a wing of theirs called the Shankill Butchers, who basically would snatch, Catholic civilians, not even IRA members, but Catholic civilians off the streets, take them back and butcher them. It was a complete sort of terroristic, there was no sort of ideology that you could possibly put in its, as a garnish on it. It's just out and out sort of terrorism and sadism. And it's so chilling in here because you don't know it's the Shankill Butchers in the car, but you're pretty sure it is. Now she manages to escape, but unfortunately someone else disappears in her stead. The Minotaur must have its sacrifice, and it's just so sort of offhandedly done. You're so relieved that she's escaped, and then in the blink of an eye someone else takes her place, on the sacrificial marble. It's scary. And then there's another brilliant scene where this sort of woman with 6 kids, seems sort of very, very all over the place and stuff. She meets an old school friend of hers who is married to a senior policeman, and they are forced to take refuge in a pub because the streets have been shut off because of a bomb scare. So this woman with the kids sort of running around her and stuff is buying drinks for the other woman, and she gets information out of her that her husband has passed to her. And it's just so chillingly done because it's, under the guise of, oh, I haven't seen you, how are you doing? My life's a mess with all my kids. Let's get drunk for old time's sake, all this kind of stuff. But no, there's a very, very chilling agenda that she's working beneath that. Again, And then finally, a stage play called Geography of a Horse Dreamer by Sam Shepard. It's a very short one-act play, and it's possibly my favourite Sam Shepard play, and I'm a big fan of Sam Shepard, or at least early Sam Shepard, I should say. And basically, this guy is a cowboy. It's modern day, but he's effectively, from a family of cowboys, and he has this sort of strange thing where he can predict the winners of horse races. Even if he's had, nothing to do with training the horses or anything. He just has this sort of innate gift. So a couple of gangsters from out east kidnap him and hole him up in a hotel and just take down the names that he spits out, and they get their sort of their gangster cronies to place bets and clean up, basically. And then one day he starts giving them names, and they can't find these names in the list of horses racing, and they don't understand what's happened. And gradually they twig that he's now switched to greyhounds. So, happy days, we can still make money from gambling. But at this point, his brothers have sort of tracked him down to this hotel, and they've come to take him home, because you realise that, and this is the chilling thing, because he's been removed from his sort of, cowboy home, he's basically falling apart mentally and physically. He's become ill. And the gangsters, of course, don't realise this, and that's why he switched from from horses to dogs. That's part of his, decline. And his brothers come to take him back home and rescue him and save him. But it's so sort of, again, it's horrific that, for personal gain, these guys would snatch a human being just because they can make money out of it, and they don't have the nous, even what they get from him, which is the way of making money, they don't realise that has changed from horses to dogs because of his physical decline. It's chilling, but not, it's horrific inside the mind. You're not really seeing anything. Even I've never seen it on stage, but I would imagine there's no obvious portrayal of this guy's physical decline. It's just wonderful and chilling. For the cinematic Archangel, Inferno Canto IX, I saw more than 1,000 souls of the ruined flee before one who strode across the Styx. What book that's not been adapted for cinema would you make into a movie or a TV series if you were a producer with unlimited financial means? None. Books are books, TV shows are TV shows, films are films. They all have their different languages, and books are not written to be turned into the language of film. Even if the author does it, if the author had chosen first to write it as a book, it should stay as a book. And I'm really puritanical on this, and it's a really unpopular view, I know. And also it's just worth saying that virtually any book that gets published these days, someone buys up the film rights just to have it covered in case they decide that it's a goable project. So the question that says, what book that's not been adapted for cinema would you make into a movie or TV series? Well, the chances are it could be in pre-production, at least, as someone is scoping whether it could be turned into a film or TV show. So yeah, I'm against the whole thing. And if you need proof, so William Burroughs' Naked Lunch was always called unfilmable, and yet someone tried to make it into a film, and all they did was prove that it was unfilmable. That's all you need to know. 5. The Noble Castle. Inferno Canto IV. The master of those who know, sitting in a philosophic family, who look to him and do him honour. Your favourite book by a pre-Christian philosopher, or a book about ancient Greece that you liked. That's interesting. It's saying ancient Greece but not ancient Rome. I am team ancient Greece, I'm afraid. And I'm team Plato rather than team Aristotle. I'm having Plato's Phaedo, which is a book which contains the death of Socrates, which is probably the closest eyewitness report we have to Socrates taking hemlock as prescribed as his punishment by the state and then dying. So it's about death and the immortality of the soul, and it also broaches notions of ideal forms, and the afterlife and all that sort of stuff, which to me are the two of the most important philosophical notions that we're still grappling with today. One is the idea of ideal forms, and the material versions of them which are sort of flawed and not perfect that we exist with on earth, versus the ideal form in the heavenly realm or whatever, which gives rise to the whole sort of philosophy of phenomenology, which is the relation between mind and body, or ideas and materiality. And that sort of overlaps with the other thing that he gives us, which is nominalism. The ideal forms, they exist, they don't have any existence that we can grasp. Everything on earth is a poor copy of them. So they only exist by their name, in their name, in the theory of them, in words, in ideas. And that's, again, something that we've been grappling with ever since, and I think it's particularly important to writers to try and deal with this. So I love this book. Yes, Plato did also produce the Republic, which has some fascistic state tendencies in it, but for me it's Plato all day long over Aristotle. What did Aristotle give us? Well, he gave us his Poetics, which is depressingly linear way of producing narrative art. He also gave us the sort of avoid the extremes and behave in the middle in terms of morality, which is equally restrictive, I can't help feeling. And also, Plato put himself out there. He had his Lyceum, he was teaching, whereas Aristotle, who also was teaching, but his works were discovered in a wine barrel. He didn't publish, unlike Aristotle, whatever publishing meant in ancient Greece, but his works are rather fortuitously survived, and I'm not going to say it's a shame they survived, but to me Aristotle cannot hold a candle up to Plato. 6. Paolo e Francesca, Inferno Canto V. Love which absolves none who are loved from loving. A book of any genre with a love story that you particularly like as part of the central plot, or not. I have 2 for that. I stupidly haven't pulled them out. The first is In the Lake of the Woods by Tim O'Brien, which was very close to being in fact, both of these books were very close to being my book of the year last year, although I didn't in the end nominate one. So In the Lake of the Woods is basically a guy who comes back from Vietnam, seemingly in one piece mentally, but actually not. And he stands for governor in Minnesota. Oh no, he stands for the Senate in Minnesota, and looks like he's going to win. And then some of his Vietnam war record is leaked, and it destroys his campaign, and he loses. So he and his wife go to a retreat on the lakes in Minnesota just to get away from it all. And the wife disappears. And O'Brien offers you 5 possible scenarios. One that she wanted to get away from him and just give up, so she's sort of rowed off into Canada. 2, that she just went rowing and had an accident and died. 3, that she went rowing and committed suicide. 4, that he actually killed her and has tried to make it look like that, suicide. And 5, that no, he is going to follow her rowing up to Canada, and they're both truly going to escape and sort of reinvent themselves and live new lives. And what's so clever is you don't know which of these. All of them are equally plausible because of how O'Brien builds up each case. And the love, they're both broken to some extent, broken people. And yet the love is so evident that, that possibility that they are both going to sort of row off to Canada and reinvent themselves as complete new people is absolutely credible. It's a possibility, but only if the love is there. Whereas obviously if he murders her, or she's so discombobulated she commits suicide, that the love isn't there as much. It's just genius. So I can't say definitively that it's a story about love, but that is definitely a very strong possibility. It's just such a clever book. And then the other one is Love and Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward, which has a lesbian couple at the heart of it. They're very different. One is an academic, one is more homebody. The homebody one wants them to have a child, and the other one is in 2 minds, and she's thinking about it because she knows it's, if she says no, they can't have a child, that's the end of the relationship. And then one night they're in bed asleep, and an ant crawls over the face of the homebody and jolts her awake, and in that sort of movement the ant sort of falls into her eye, and she reports this to her partner, who says, don't be silly, that can't happen. And then she realises that if she denies this as being a possibility, that it could even happen with her scientist brain, again it would break the relationship. So she sort of bites her tongue and in a way pledges her love for her partner by believing this story, and therefore also knows that she has taken the decision that they will have a child together. So it's that opening scene is a brilliant portrayal. And then we get lots of other scenes in different genre types and stuff, because the homebody, they have the kid, but the homebody dies of cancer. It's not a spoiler. And it's a story about mothers and sons, both the living mother and the dead mother, the relationship to the son. We get a chapter from the point of view of the ant inside the homebody's brain before she dies, obviously, which is, normally you think, oh, anthropomorphism, this is shit, doesn't work. But it absolutely does. It's extraordinary. The ants can taste the cancer, can taste the tumour before anyone else knows, before it's been diagnosed and stuff like that. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. And it's called Love and Other Thought Experiments because each chapter is preceded by a real life theory of a thought experiment, such as the difference between how animals perceive and think and how humans do, and things like that. Just scrolling down to the next prompt. 7, Ulysses. Inferno Canto XXXIII. Until the sea had closed up over us. Name a book you loved in any genre, whose protagonist leads a group of people to follow his or her courage and ambition into an adventure. So I've got a couple for this. This is Barn 8 by Deb Erlin Umferth, which Doris at Aldi Books informs me is on the long list for this year's BookTube Prize. And it's a balmy but very highly enjoyable read, sort of animal rights, animal liberation, whereby 2 sort of health inspectors of farms and food production decide that they are going to liberate a whole barn full of battery chickens. And they sort of put together this motley band of people to help, because they need, huge lorries and all this sort of stuff. Then they need to find somewhere big enough to store them in healthy conditions. And it's completely balmy and wonderful, but it's a great read. And the other is back to Victor Pelevin, who I mentioned. This is The Hall of Singing Caryatids, and it starts off with a bunch of Russian women, very beautiful women, who are sort of trying to get on the up, become a model or a singer, or somewhere into that world of celebrity, or at least high society in Russia. and they made this offer that they, the group of them considered to basically become prostitutes in a high-class brothel for only sort of select clients. But it's a slightly strange brothel in that they are sort of arrayed in different rooms, different themed rooms, like statues. They're sort of body painted and stuff, and they're sort of then arrayed like statues for the men to come in and consider them. And for a lot of it's a very short book, and for a lot of the book, no men come into the room that this group of women are in, so they just stood there and stuff. But they're given this drug to help them be statues, to not move, to stay still. And increasingly, then we get to the sort of the Buddhist element of the book as the main woman starts seeing things and imagining herself in this sort of insect sort of state brought on by the drug and stuff. It's a wonderful little book. It's very short, so it starts off with this sort of social critique of modern day Russia, and then moves into the spiritual Buddhist stuff effortlessly in the course of 105 pages. It's brilliantly done. 8. St Bernard the Poet. Paradiso Canto XXXIII. Love in your womb was fanned to fire again. What is your favourite poetry books? What is your favourite poetry books in translation? That should be either what are your favourite or what is your favourite poetry book. But anyway, so for me it is The Lost Body by Martinique poet called Aimé Césaire, and he is very much credited with the introduction of negritude, sort of a mixture of wherever people of colour find themselves, having been sort of colonised and transported, but referring back to Africa, but preserving in this case the Caribbean sort of flavour of blackness. And as says with illustrations by Pablo Picasso, this is a very beautiful book. The poems are great, and you have Picasso sketches. The two men never sort of collaborated directly on this. I mean, Picasso's commissioned to produce but they knew each other from sort of marches and protests in Paris in the radical 60s. I missed out one book. I think was for the VIRGIL. Yeah, it was the VIRGIL, which is The Vegetarian by Kang, and that scene in section 2 where so section 1 sees the young woman around the family dining table increasingly becoming intolerant of meat and declaring herself vegetarian, which is sort of unheard of within sort of traditional South Korean families, and her family are very unhappy about it. And then the second section is she wants to transform into something vegetative, and she meets this, I think it's her husband's brother, I think from memory, it's a long time ago since I read it, who will paint her, body paint her all over into a plant or a flower, and this will be the transformation that she wants. But he's only got one thing in mind, and he wants to have sex with her. So it's this scene of the guy painting her and them having sex, and she's almost completely disembodied. She's a piece of meat who no longer wants to be a piece of meat. So the fact that he's having sex with her, she almost doesn't feel it, doesn't experience it, and yet obviously it is sexual assault, because it's not consensual, but it's a weird not consensual. It's like she's abdicated the whole concept of consent, and it's a vivid graphic scene. Now, I think a lot of people found it a bit hokey and just didn't buy into it, but I found it really, really powerful and effective. The only problem I had with the book was the third section after that, where she's sort of being rehabilitated by her sister, and that seemed to be going nowhere fast as they're sort of talking. But that second scene really stays with me and is extraordinary. But as I say, I know a lot of people didn't really buy into it. And then finally, the final prompt is just to tag someone. So quite a few people, I think, have done this. So I'm going to tag Alan over at Big Hard Books and Classics because he is a Dante man. And basically, you don't have to be a Dante person to do this, but I encourage anyone, particularly if you are a Dante fan, to do this tag. So thanks to Tom at LA Books for coming up with the tag, and thanks to Roz for tagging me. That was my version of the Divine Comedy Reader tag. Till next time.